On a quiet fall morning in a newly gentrified park, a white woman called 911, claiming a leashed German shepherd was aggressive near children. Two officers responded. One hesitated. The other saw only threat. To them, the elderly black woman with the cane and calm dog was just another problem. Out of place, easily dismissed. What they didn't see was her past. A former federal justice, composed, unshakable, and sharper than any courtroom blade. When the officer fired and killed her dog, he thought it ended there. But that morning didn't silence her. It sparked a reckoning that would not be ignored. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun filtered through the thinning branches of birch and maple, casting a lattice of gold and soft shadow across the paved path that curled through Dunbar Park. The air carried a crispness that only early fall could summon. Clean, invigorating, edged with the scent of dry leaves and distant chimney smoke. Children's laughter floated over from the playground, mingling with the rhythmic squeak of the swings and the rumbling coo of doves in the canopy overhead. It was the kind of morning designed for peace, for slowness, for reclaiming quiet rituals. August Hill moved with the grace of habit, her cane tapping lightly beside her as she walked, not for need, but for rhythm. She wore a well-pressed gray hoodie and dark slacks, her silver hair neatly pulled back beneath a soft wool cap. Her eyes, though softened by time, still held a kind of stately clarity, one that gave pause to those who looked too long. She had always carried herself with intention, even when she had nothing to prove. Beside her, tethered on a leather leash worn smooth with use, strode Langston, a proud, alert German shepherd with a black saddle and amber eyes that rarely missed a detail. He didn't tug or pace, didn't sniff every patch of grass or dart after passing joggers. He simply matched her gait, ears forward, tail loose but high. The kind of dog that drew attention even when still. People noticed Langston, and Langston noticed people. They had walked this path almost daily for the past 7 years. The park had once been a little wild, a little unkempt, mostly filled with locals who knew one another by name or nod. Back then, August could sit on the same weathered bench for an hour without a second glance, trading stories with old friends who'd lived through riots and recoveries, through promise and disappointment, through the long, slow drift of change. But now, the benches had been replaced with tasteful wrought iron, and the trees tagged with little plaques indicating their species. There were bike lanes, a dog waste station, an artisan coffee kiosk on the north lawn. And more than once, August had watched a young couple walk by and referred to it as Linden Grove, which was what the real estate brochures had started calling the area when the new condos were built just beyond the tree line. She had adapted, as she always did, but she noticed the shift, the way old neighbors disappeared and new ones arrived with strollers and wireless earbuds and a low, reflexive fear of anything that didn't look or sound like them. She never said anything when it happened. She just watched. As they rounded the curve near the playground, Langston's ears perked. A squirrel, fat and bold, darted across the grass toward a nearby elm. Langston's head tilted sharply, his body tensing just enough to show interest, and he let out a single, sharp bark, a warning more than anything, a primal hello. August glanced down and gave the leash a gentle correction. Langston settled at once, but across the grass, a woman seated on a bench reacted as though a fuse had been lit. She pulled her son, maybe 5, maybe 6 years old, tight against her side, shielding him with an arm that trembled just enough to be visible. Her eyes locked onto the dog, then onto August, and stayed there far too long. August responded with a nod, small, polite, composed, the kind that said, "He's leashed, he's trained, you're safe." The woman didn't nod back. She didn't blink. Her mouth thinned, and her hand went to her purse. Langston tilted his head again, sensing something else this time. August kept walking, her face unreadable, but the temperature of the morning had shifted. As they passed by the park's flower beds, freshly planted, far too manicured, August found herself thinking not about the bench she once shared with Miss Clara, or the barbecue pit that used to stand where the playground now gleamed in primary colors, but about the way people's eyes had started changing when they saw her in this neighborhood. Not hostile, necessarily. Just scanning, assessing, filing. It had been a long time since someone looked at her and saw who she truly was. Longer still since she had needed them to, and yet today, something crawled at the edges of her thoughts, a feeling she hadn't carried in years, a question she didn't want to ask, but could no longer avoid. If they didn't know your name, what would they assume you were? She heard the boy whisper something. The woman stood up, taking his hand, never looking away. Langston didn't bark again. He just walked on, steady and quiet. But the weight of the moment settled in August's chest like ash. Fine, familiar, and hard to shake. The wind picked up slightly, rattling the dry leaves like distant applause. And somewhere behind her, a phone began to ring. The park's serenity thinned like morning fog under a rising sun, nearly imperceptible at first, then undeniably absent. Maureen Tillman stood stiffly by the bench, one hand still clamped around her son's wrist, the other wrapped around the cell phone pressed to her cheek. Her gaze was fixed, glassy and narrowed, on the figure now rounding the path ahead. August Hill, moving at a measured pace, her German shepherd keeping perfect formation beside her, head forward, tail waving in neutral confidence. "I need to report a dog attack," Maureen said quickly, her voice low but tight with urgency. A large German shepherd just barked and tried to charge. "Yes, near the playground." She gave a breathless pause, then added, "It's aggressive. It's scaring the kids. He could bite someone." The dispatcher, a woman trained to detect strain, logged her tone as distressed and decisive. A nearby child's giggle echoed faintly in the background, but that sound didn't register as contradictory. The call was entered into the system as a priority response. 2 units dispatched. The phrase, "threatening behavior toward minors," blinked across the terminal. August continued her walk, unaware, her eyes now drifting toward the row of homes just beyond the eastern fence line, once single-family bungalows, now reshaped into glassy modern slabs with curated lawns and black steel gates. She remembered when that fence didn't exist, when kids hopped it on dares and bikes clattered through the grass without anyone complaining. She remembered how Miss Clara used to sit on her porch with lemonade, watching the whole block grow up and grow old and change without asking for permission. Langston caught a new scent and lifted his nose, but didn't pull. His training was second nature. August adjusted her grip on the leash with a flick of her wrist and murmured something under her breath, something gentle, reassuring. Farther down the block, a police cruiser rolled into the side lot and coasted to a stop by the curb. Inside, Officer Brent Kowalski sat upright, tapping the steering wheel with his knuckle as the dispatch report repeated through the radio. He grunted. "Dog call," he muttered, more to himself than to his partner. Officer Sean Riker glanced up from his tablet, brows knit. "Aggressive dog near kids? Could be nothing." Kowalski snorted. "Could be something," he said, pulling the gear shift and opening the door in one smooth motion. His hand, out of habit or something less innocent, drifted down to rest lightly on his holstered sidearm. August reached the center of the park's circular trail just as the officers stepped into view. She didn't notice them at first. Her gaze was angled downward, focused on Langston, who had stopped momentarily to sniff the air and glance toward the path ahead. But Langston noticed. His ears perked, his body shifted slightly. August followed his gaze. Two officers, white, mid-30s, both. One walked like a man who assumed he would not be questioned. The other followed half a pace behind, his steps quieter, eyes scanning everything too quickly to see anything fully. Kowalski's voice cut across the space with authority honed for performance. "Ma'am, step away from the dog!" August blinked once, slowly, as if translating a language she no longer cared to speak. She raised her head, her body still. Her tone was calm, unmistakably controlled. "He's leashed," she said, her voice a measured mix of poise and steel. "He's not a threat." Riker flinched at how sure she sounded. There was no panic in her tone, no fear, no guilt. He stepped slightly to the left, his own hand near his radio, unsure whether to speak or wait. Kowalski's posture stiffened. "I said, step away from the dog." Langston, sensing the sudden change in energy, moved subtly to stand in front of August. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply placed himself between her and the unfamiliar tension, body low but not crouched, tail raised but not bristling, ears focused but not flat. The kind of stance only someone familiar with dogs would read as protective, not hostile. August didn't move. Her shoulders squared, and her hand remained on the leash. "I'm not stepping away from my dog," she said firmly. "He is under control. He has not made a move toward anyone." Kowalski's fingers twitched at his side. Riker opened his mouth, but didn't speak. Somewhere behind them, near the playground, a child called for his mother. The wind stirred the trees gently, shaking down a loose halo of red and gold leaves that fluttered to the ground without ceremony. Kowalski's jaw flexed. "You're not listening." "I'm not obeying unlawful instructions," August replied, her tone now firmer. "If you have reason to detain me, explain it. If you don't, I'll be continuing my walk." Langston hadn't shifted. His eyes stayed trained on the officers, alert but not agitated. He wasn't pulling, wasn't pacing, just watching, poised in the way dogs are when they feel something wrong in the humans around them. Kowalski took a step forward. Langston matched him, stepping half a foot ahead of August, not lunging, not even stiffening, just present. "I need you to sit down," Kowalski barked suddenly, the command harsh and edged. "No," August said, more softly now, but no less decisively. "You don't give me orders unless I'm being detained." "Am I?" Riker shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we're just responding to a call. Someone reported an aggressive dog." "This is the aggressive dog." August gestured gently with the leash. "This calm, leashed dog, standing still while you shout?" Langston turned his head slightly toward her voice, then back toward the officers. His eyes didn't waver. Kowalski's breath caught, and though he didn't yet draw his weapon, his stance widened. "Keep your dog in check," he snapped. "He is in check," August said. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was taut. Riker swallowed hard. His radio chirped softly. Kowalski's knuckles flexed near the leather strap of his holster. A squirrel darted from the base of a tree nearby, skittering over dry leaves. Langston's ears twitched. He didn't move. August took a slow breath, her heart beating harder now, but still steady. She did not sit. She did not back away. And Kowalski's hand still hovered, just a little too close. A gust swept down from the hillside, tossing a whirl of brittle leaves into the air, spinning orange and brown across the pathway in a flurry that seemed, for one suspended moment, to freeze the scene in place. Langston's coat shimmered in the light, his stance unchanged, his breathing steady. He stood as still as marble, and yet the tension that clung to the air around him crackled like a wire drawn too tight. Kowalski's voice came again, louder this time, stripped of pretense and covered in the bark of someone no longer pretending to de-escalate. "I said, sit down now." His hand now fully grasped the weapon at his hip, unsnapped the holster. His eyes weren't focused on Langston's posture or August's calm insistence. They were narrow, darting, locked on a manufactured threat. "I am not resisting," August said, her voice unwavering even as the edges of it hardened. "And neither is my dog." Langston stepped forward by half a foot. No sudden burst of energy, no lunge, only that slow, decisive motion of a dog interceding instinctively, forming a barrier, not just of body, but of bond. His tail remained high, his body still not taut, but something in his posture must have read differently to the man already looking for justification. Kowalski's hand came up in a flash. The shot cracked like the breaking of the world. Langston didn't yelp. He didn't recoil. He simply staggered once, as if the earth had shifted beneath his feet, then folded to the ground in a fluid, collapsing arc, his head hitting the dirt with a soft, final thud that felt louder than the gun itself. The leash went slack in August's hand. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Only a sound from deep within her, something primal and breaking, the kind of scream that doesn't rise, but tears itself out, whole and wild and grief-stricken. She dropped to her knees without thought, arms wrapping around the warm weight of Langston's body, still breathing but fading too fast. Blood bloomed beneath him in a dark pool against the earth. Her hands pressed to his side as if she could hold the life in place through sheer will. "No, no, no, Langston, stay with me," she whispered, voice shaking now, her control cracking for the first time. "Ma'am, step away from the animal," came Kowalski's voice, cold and clinical. She didn't move. "Now," he added louder, "or we will detain you for obstruction." Riker's voice came next, hesitant and quieter. "She's not doing anything. She's interfering with a response," Kowalski snapped back. August looked up then, eyes blazing, not with rage alone, but with something deeper. Betrayal so complete it became incandescent. "Interfering?" she hissed, every syllable trembling with fury. "You killed my dog." Riker shifted uncomfortably. His posture was slanted now, one foot half turned away, as if his body wanted to leave before his orders caught up. He looked down at Langston and seemed to see, for the first time, not a threat, not a suspect or a suspect's shield, but a living creature shot for no crime other than existing between his owner and a frightened man with a gun. "You need to back up, ma'am," Kowalski said again. "This is a crime scene." August's body curved protectively over Langston's, her hands gripping his collar, refusing to loosen. "This is a murder scene," she whispered, the word landing like a bell in cold air. People had begun to gather. Not many, not yet, but enough. A teenager across the path pulled out his phone and started recording. An older man from the basketball courts walked forward a few steps, then stopped, wary. Whispers spread like smoke. They shot the dog. She didn't do anything. She's crying. What the heck happened? Kowalski turned sharply. "Put your phones away. This is an active situation." But no one did. The cameras stayed trained on him, on August, on the motionless body lying in the grass, and the woman who refused to leave him. Langston's side had stilled. No rise, no fall, no breath. "I need animal control to this location," Kowalski barked into his radio, his voice spiking. Also requesting backup for crowd control and potential non-compliance. August didn't hear the rest. Her ears had gone underwater. The world was distant now, distorted, like a drumbeat behind a closed door. Her fingers traced Langston's fur, brushing the spot just behind his ear where he liked to be scratched. She whispered his name like it was a lullaby, like he might still hear it somewhere. A pair of paramedics arrived. Not for Langston, not for her. Just protocol. Just presence. They glanced at the officers, then the crowd, then her, their faces unreadable. One knelt and began cordoning off the area with bright yellow tape. Langston's tail was nearly tangled in it. August looked up, face streaked with tears she didn't remember letting fall. "Don't you touch him," she said. "You're being detained," Kowalski said without inflection, moving forward now with cuffs in hand. "Failure to comply." "For holding my dog?" she shot back. "You want to add cruelty to your list of sins?" Riker glanced at his partner, voice low. "She's not resisting. Just let her—" "You let her stay, and this crowd keeps growing," Kowalski hissed under his breath. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists a moment later, colder than expected, heavy and final. They pulled her gently but firmly away. She didn't fight. She didn't shout. But her eyes, locked on Langston's body as it began to fade into distance, glowed with the kind of grief that burns into something sharper than pain. As they guided her toward the squad car, the voices around her multiplied. "She didn't do anything. Why'd they shoot it? Was that dog even off the leash? I got it on video, man. The whole thing." Cameras still followed. One young man filmed from the sidewalk, his lens trained on the departing cruiser, whispering to no one in particular, "She's somebody. You can just tell." Inside the car, August leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Her jaw clenched, not out of defiance, not out of anger, but because she already knew something they didn't. They had no idea who they had just put their hands on. August Hill was released just after midnight. No charges filed, no paperwork given, no apology offered, just a blank, perfunctory signature on a discharge form and a quiet escort through the back entrance of the precinct to avoid the growing crowd of journalists outside. The sidewalk glowed under the pale hue of sodium lights, and somewhere across the street, a camera lens flickered red. She didn't say a word as she walked out. Her body moved like it remembered its purpose, even while her mind floated half an inch above everything. Disconnected, preserved, waiting to rejoin itself. She held her coat tight around her, the chill in the air doing little to compete with the hollow ache still blooming inside her chest. The cab ride home was wordless. The driver didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Everyone in the city had seen something by now, either the video or the headline or the image of a woman on her knees in the dirt, cradling the body of a dog like a fallen soldier. When she stepped through the front door of her home, the world stood still. Langston's leash, still coiled on the entry table where she had left it earlier that day, caught her eye first. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached out and picked it up, running her fingers along the leather like it was skin. It was stiff now, dried from the trauma and the sun. She placed it back down carefully, then walked through her home in silence. She didn't take off her coat. She didn't sit. She walked quietly through the familiar space. Framed photographs, stacks of case law, a painting of Thurgood Marshall given to her by a former clerk. All exactly where she'd left them, as though the world outside hadn't shifted beneath her feet. August dialed without hesitation. The voice on the other end picked up after the first ring. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. "I'm booking a flight," said Cyrus, already knowing. And that was enough. He arrived that night with a duffel bag over his shoulder and 3 phones in his pocket. His own and 2 spares he kept for moments like this. Cyrus Hill wasn't just her son. He was an infrastructure in his own right, part tech entrepreneur, part watchdog, and all loyalty. He hugged her the way he always did, tight and brief, and sat down across from her without ceremony. Their language didn't need to be out loud anymore. For the next 48 hours, their world became evidence. August moved with the patience of someone who had spent decades dissecting legal strategy at the highest level, and knew how to wait for every piece before making a single move. She didn't call in favors to protect herself. She didn't need protection. She called in names for clarity, for precision, for leverage. Within hours, she had secured the dispatch log from the responding unit, the service records of both officers involved, and the GPS data from the patrol car tracking their arrival into the park. The files painted a familiar, exhausting picture. Officer Brent Kowalski had 3 previous excessive force complaints in the past 6 years. None sustained. Officer Sean Riker's record was cleaner but not remarkable, marked mostly by passivity and a tendency to follow, not lead. August noted every detail. The media, meanwhile, had already begun assembling its narrative. The headline on the morning broadcast read, "Dog Killed During Police Response. Community Divided Over Use of Force." Chief Harold Denning addressed the press with the stony, prepared face of a man seasoned in evasion. His statement, just under 3 minutes, emphasized procedure and vague regrets without accepting fault. "We understand this was an emotionally difficult moment for all involved. Our officers responded to a credible report of an aggressive animal in a public space. While tragic, the shooting followed protocol for public safety. There was no mention of August by name, no expression of remorse, no signal that anything had gone wrong." Maureen Tillman, now framed as a concerned mother, appeared on a local morning show with a trembling voice and a carefully rehearsed recollection. "It was terrifying. The dog was massive, barking and pulling. I thought someone was going to get hurt. I did what I had to do to protect my son." The hosts nodded solemnly. No one questioned the footage, or its gaps, because by then, that footage had surfaced. Released by the department under the umbrella of community transparency, the video was clipped, edited, and stripped of audio context. It showed the moment Langston barked at the squirrel, cut to August standing as officers approached, then jumped forward to the second the dog stepped slightly in front of her. The screen froze. Then, the shot. No footage of the verbal exchange, no footage of August calmly asserting control, no leash visible, no restraint shown, just a woman, a dog, a step, and a bullet. The department issued a follow-up statement. The video released is consistent with officer accounts. The use of force falls within standard procedure. The matter is considered resolved. The union issued its own message of support for the officers. Still, there was no apology. Not from the department. Not from the officers. Not from Maureen. Not from anyone. August didn't flinch. But something inside her had settled into stone. She made the next round of calls with a different tone. Not cold. Not angry. Focused. The kind of voice that doesn't ask, but expects. By the end of the day, she had a copy of the full dispatch transcript, a memo referencing the officer's approach route, and a cache of internal documents that should have taken weeks to clear, but didn't. The department finally learned her name. And that changed everything. The tone shifted instantly. No calls came, but silence became louder. Requests for comment from the city stalled. Body cam footage, previously said to be pending routine review, was now indefinitely withheld. No legal justification was offered. Just red tape. Just wait. But August Hill wasn't waiting anymore. The morning after the edited footage aired, the silence in August's house was different. No longer the disorienting quiet of grief, it had hardened into deliberation, the heavy stillness of strategy being formed. August sat in the same place she'd been for hours, still in the gray hoodie that now carried a meaning she had not chosen, but would not shed. Across the table, Cyrus scrolled through city infrastructure databases on one screen, while uploading body cam policy PDFs onto another. His fingers moved like a man digging with urgency, but knowing the treasure was buried deep. A second laptop beside him tracked metadata from the department's public report releases, cross-referenced with internal staffing logs they'd obtained through a quiet favor called in from an old friend at the DOJ. August didn't pace. She never had. Her power was in stillness, in patience, in knowing that truth always had a rhythm. It only needed to be caught and exposed before someone buried it again. She had just finished annotating the GPS trail of the patrol car when Cyrus froze mid-keystroke. The silence lengthened just slightly. "Mom," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Come look at this." She was beside him before he finished the sentence. On the interface was a raw export of the city's 911 call data from that morning. They'd seen the call from Maureen Tillman already. The one placed at 9:42 a.m., flagged high priority, tagged as dog aggression in proximity to minors. But now there was another entry. Unflagged. Earlier. The timestamp read 9:21 a.m. The origin. A landline extension registered to the office of Councilman Eric Bell. August leaned in, her eyes scanning the details with the muscle memory of someone trained to extract meaning from subtext. The report described a suspicious older woman walking a large dog near the perimeter of the school-adjacent path. It included details: dark cane, gray hoodie, black German shepherd. The note had been internally labeled as non-emergency patrol advisement. And more curiously, it had been marked internal use only. It had not gone through the public dispatcher's hands. It had been routed directly to the local precinct. She stared at the screen for a long moment. "You're sure that number's from Bell's office?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Cyrus nodded. "Registered city line. Routed from a staff desk. The extension matches the one used in last month's infrastructure report release. No spoofing. It's real." August's eyes narrowed, not with shock, but with the confirmation of something she'd suspected, but hadn't yet articulated. They hadn't reacted to Langston. They'd come for her. The earlier call reframed everything. The dog's bark had been irrelevant. Maureen's alarm had been convenient, even useful, but not the origin point. The wheels had begun turning before the leash even left her hand that morning. The patrol car's path, unexplained at the time, suddenly made sense. It hadn't been wandering. It had been waiting, watching. Someone had planted a seed. And when the bark came, just one bark at a squirrel, it became the perfect excuse to act. They weren't responding to fear, August said, mostly to herself. They were responding to a narrative they were given 20 minutes earlier. She sat back slowly, folding her arms, her fingers tucked close against her sleeves. "I was being tracked," she said. "Not in the park. Before it." Cyrus exhaled. "Which means Bell knew, or someone in his office did. Enough to call in a description accurate down to your coat." August tapped the table once, sharply. "This wasn't reactionary," she said. "It was constructed." They stared at the screen a while longer. The implications pulsed between them. Ugly, damning, undeniably deliberate. She wasn't just a woman out for a walk with her dog. She wasn't seen as a neighbor, a citizen, or even a former justice of the highest court in the land. She had been reduced, before a single word was spoken or a weapon drawn, to a perceived threat wrapped in assumed suspicion. The dog had never been the problem. She was. August rose from the table and stepped toward the window. Outside, the sun was rising, casting soft light across the tops of homes that no longer belonged to the families who built them. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, oblivious. A delivery truck, double-parked. The city moved as if it hadn't just tried to erase someone who helped build its constitutional foundation. She didn't feel rage. Not in the way others might. What she felt was deeper, older, an anger honed into principle, a kind of righteous clarity only earned by witnessing too much and forgetting nothing. "They wanted me erased quietly," she said at last, "not physically, institutionally, to have it all framed as a misunderstanding so they could move on, and I would quietly bury my dog and disappear." She turned back to Cyrus. "They chose the wrong woman." The first televised segment aired just 2 days after the selectively edited footage was released, a carefully timed piece nestled between a midweek stock market update and a segment on a missing child. It didn't lead the broadcast, nor did it thunder across the screen with overt drama. Instead, it slipped into the public consciousness like a whisper in a crowded room, subtle, poised, and deliberate in its narrative direction. The anchor's voice dropped just slightly in pitch, the way broadcasters are trained to do when they want their audience to lean in. "Tonight, new developments in the Dunbar Park police incident," he began, his tone carrying the calm cadence of impartiality, though the language beneath it told another story. "Sources suggest the woman involved, since identified as a former federal appointee, may have contributed to the tension by refusing lawful orders during the encounter." Behind him, the screen showed a freeze-frame image of August captured at an unflattering angle, one arm raised slightly in a defensive posture mid-sentence, mouth open just enough to imply confrontation. The footage had been edited down to a series of clipped exchanges with missing audio and no discernible context, just fragments of motion, shadows of meaning, and silence left to be filled by public assumption. What should have been a tragedy examined with care was instead molded into a spectacle of speculation. The story became less about what had actually happened and more about how it could be manipulated into something easier for the public to digest. Less moral ambiguity, more performative order. By the following morning, other outlets had picked up the same thread, each one echoing the language of non-compliance and escalation, as if the words themselves had weight beyond their use as narrative glue. Online headlines framed August not as a grieving citizen or a retired justice, but as a symbol of defiance, each one laced with the subtext that perhaps she had brought the response upon herself. That was when the anonymous sources began to appear. In a Sunday editorial, buried 3 pages deep beneath an article on local transit budgets, a quote attributed to an officer familiar with internal reports described August as needlessly combative and dismissive of officer commands. The language was clinical, sterile, and framed in a way that offered deniability without ever having to provide proof. It was the kind of statement designed to linger, not because it was true, but because it offered just enough uncertainty to dull the outrage that had begun to form. The smear campaign did not arrive with a single devastating blow. It crept in like water through a crack in the foundation, slow and corrosive, eroding truth beneath the surface while appearing invisible from the street. And in its wake, Eric Bell, whose office had placed the preemptive call to law enforcement that morning, chose the well-worn path of political retreat. He gave a brief statement to the press filled with the kind of polished ambiguity that only seasoned politicians could deliver with a straight face. "We're all looking for accountability and healing," he said, "but we have to wait for the facts. There's no room for rushed judgments in matters this sensitive." He didn't answer questions, he didn't return August's calls, and he certainly didn't acknowledge the internal memo that had originated from a desk not 10 feet from his own. The police union, ever eager to protect its rank and file, responded with forceful choreography. At a carefully staged press event outside the precinct, flanked by officers in full uniform standing at rigid attention, the union president stepped to the microphone and delivered a statement dripping with righteous indignation. "Our officers responded to a call about a threatening animal near a playground," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the steps and into the cameras waiting just beyond the barricade. They followed the procedures they were trained to follow. They protected the public. And now they're being vilified by individuals who weren't even there. The press recorded every word. The soundbite was repeated endlessly. And then came the interview. Brent Kowalski, no longer in uniform, appeared on a late-night cable show hosted by a man well known for championing law and order narratives. Dressed in a button-down shirt, his hair carefully combed, and his face composed with the fragility of someone rehearsing empathy, Kowalski delivered his version of events. "I didn't want to shoot," he said, his voice lowered in what might have passed for sorrow. "I've struggled with PTSD from a previous attack. When I saw that dog move toward us, something just snapped. I did what I thought I had to do." He didn't mention that the dog had been leashed. He didn't describe how calmly August had spoken. He simply painted a picture of fear, curated with precision, and shielded himself beneath it. The interviewer nodded sympathetically, leaning forward with eyes full of forced concern. "So you were afraid for your life?" he prompted, handing the narrative back with both hands. "I was," Kowalski said. "For my life, and for hers." That moment, stripped of its actual meaning, replayed in viral loops across media channels for days. Inside her home, August watched none of it. Cyrus did. He watched every segment, documented every quote, tracked every shift in public discourse like a cartographer charting hostile terrain. And he saw what was happening with painful clarity. The media wasn't reporting. It was participating. It was burying. Letters began to arrive. Some handwritten in block capitals, others typed on flimsy printer paper, folded twice and mailed without return addresses. A few came in thick envelopes with typed notes clipped to opinion columns, circled in red ink, the tone just restrained enough to avoid criminal threat, yet loaded with contempt. August read the first two. She didn't bother with the rest. Cyrus, meanwhile, discovered that his company's cloud servers had been breached. Nothing was taken, at least not visibly, but enough had been accessed to send a message. A warning, not in words, but in reach. Their adversaries weren't confined to one department or office. They were operating through a broader network of protection, whisper campaigns, and intimidation, all focused on making her disappear quietly. But August did not disappear. She continued to prepare. She called in new legal contacts. She began drafting statements. She contacted a watchdog organization with expertise in digital media forensics. And she kept the leash. Every day she passed by it on the table. And every day she remembered what had started all of this, and what could not be allowed to end in silence. They were building a wall around the truth. She had made a career out of breaking those. The rain came lightly that evening, brushing against the windows in uneven rhythms, a gentle percussion that seemed to echo the tension inside the house. The storm hadn't broken, but it was close, the kind of sky that couldn't decide between brooding and boiling. Inside the living room, the air felt thick, not from heat, but from something older. Grief with nowhere left to go, and anger that had learned to be patient. August sat in the armchair she had claimed years ago, a deep burgundy piece with worn velvet arms and a mahogany frame that had survived 3 moves and more than one difficult memory. Her posture was upright, but not rigid, her cane resting beside her, unused for hours, yet still never far. Across from her, Cyrus sat with his elbows on his knees, fingers steepled, watching her with the quiet attentiveness of a son who had long since learned to read the pauses between her sentences better than the sentences themselves. She was staring out the window, not at anything in particular, but in that deep, far-off way that means the past has stepped back into the room uninvited. "When I first joined the circuit," she began without turning her head, I had a case involving a young man who'd been arrested for shoplifting. 19, barely finished high school. He'd stolen a box of diapers and a can of formula. Her voice was level, but softer than usual, the memory tugging something vulnerable into the open. The officers who brought him in said he'd resisted. Broke his wrist in 3 places while they were detaining him. Said he became aggressive. But the surveillance footage showed him crouched on the sidewalk, hands open, waiting. Cyrus didn't interrupt. He had heard stories like this before, but not with the same weight she carried now. I dismissed the charges, ordered an investigation into the arresting officers. The police union pushed back, issued a complaint against me, said I had a pattern of undermining law enforcement credibility. She gave a quiet, humorless breath through her nose. They buried the follow-up. The boy never got an apology. He didn't even get his hospital bill waived. She looked at Cyrus then, her eyes steady but rimmed with something rawer than resolve. That was the first time I realized the system doesn't correct itself. It defends itself, automatically, reflexively, like a body with nerve damage. It can't tell the difference between a hand reaching for help and a threat. It just strikes. Cyrus sat back slowly, his gaze not just focused on her, but on the quiet fire building behind her composure. "I could have used my title this time," she said. "At the park. I could have said who I was. I've seen judges do it, lawyers do it. Hell, I've seen washed-up officials flash badges that expired years ago just to avoid a ticket." He nodded, knowing better than to offer reassurance too early. "But I didn't," she continued, "because I've spent my life insisting that dignity doesn't come from title. And I needed them to see me as I was, as any woman would be, alone, walking her dog, following the rules, doing nothing wrong." Her voice caught, not with weakness, but with the effort of holding grief and principle in the same breath. They saw a problem anyway. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. Cyrus shifted slightly, then leaned forward. "You don't have to justify any of it to me," he said gently. "But I think you already know you're not fighting just for you anymore." August gave a small, deliberate nod. "Which is why I have to do it right." He didn't press further. She had said what needed saying, and in saying it, she had peeled back the armor just long enough for him to see the wound beneath it. Not just the loss of Langston, but the exhaustion of having to fight the same battle over and over again, each time older, more alone, and less willing to accept the hollow apologies that came too late. The following morning, the doorbell rang just past 9. Daria Melendez stood on the porch, rain slicked across her coat, and curls pressed damp against her cheeks, holding a folder so tightly it had bent at the corners. She introduced herself simply, with no unnecessary flourish, her voice quiet but firm. August let her in without hesitation. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where strategy had begun, where grief had been folded into silence, and where war now dressed itself in calm. "I've been following this case since day one," Daria began, placing the folder between them. "But I wasn't interested in telling the story they were feeding the media. I've been speaking with people inside the department, not the ones they parade on television, the ones they keep quiet." August opened the folder, eyes scanning the documents with practiced speed. Daria continued, "There are 2 officers who've come forward anonymously, both in tech support. They were part of the internal chain that received and flagged the body cam footage. According to them, the department altered timestamps, removed audio from at least one feed, and failed to report a separate clip entirely, one that showed Riker warning Kowalski not to escalate." Cyrus let out a slow breath, the kind that felt like something between validation and dread. "There's more," Daria said, sliding another sheet forward. "Records show discrepancies in the internal software logs, files being renamed, footage split, metadata altered. If this were private sector IT, someone would already be facing an audit. August closed the folder slowly. "They're trying to erase reality," she said, not as a question, not even as outrage, but as acknowledgement. "They're trying to control the version of it that survives," Daria corrected gently. The three sat in silence for a moment, each one feeling the weight of what they now carried together. "I don't publish anything without your go-ahead," Daria added. "This isn't just a story. It's your life. And I've seen what happens when people like you, people with names that matter, finally push back. They'll come for you harder." August smiled then, not with amusement, but with clarity. "Good," she said. "Let them come. But this time, they'll find the door open and the lights on." The leak broke just before dawn. It began not with a news broadcast or a press conference, but with a single grainy thumbnail posted on an independent platform known more for investigative exposés than viral videos. The image showed nothing new at first glance, just the park, the playground in the background, the path where it had all unfolded. But the headline beneath it was plain, unpolished, and direct in a way the polished press had refused to be. Full, unedited body cam footage. The Dunbar Park shooting. The video was nearly 17 minutes long, stitched together seamlessly from both officers' body cams, their audio intact, their movements visible from every angle. There were no breaks, no missing sound, no strategically frozen frames or tightly cropped edits. Just the unfiltered record of a morning that the department had worked desperately to reduce to a headline and a soundbite. Langston appeared first, calm, alert, his leash taut but relaxed in August's steady hand. He didn't growl, he didn't lunge. He stood between her and the approaching officers, his ears forward, his posture protective but entirely non-aggressive. In one frame, he shifted to the left, clearly tethered, and never once stepping beyond the space his leash allowed. August's voice could be heard, even and measured. "He's under control. He is leashed." Her tone did not waver, did not rise. She didn't shout. She didn't defy. She explained, as clearly as the law itself. Then came the most damning moment, Kowalski drawing his weapon. It happened within seconds of arriving. No assessment. No observation. His hand moved to the holster before a word had even passed between them. The click of the safety echoed in both recordings. He didn't ask questions. He barked orders. He never registered that Langston was not the threat. Riker's voice followed, low but clear. "Let's wait a second. He's leashed, Brent." That sentence changed everything. It wasn't just restraint. It was awareness. Riker had seen what Kowalski refused to see. But he said nothing more. He followed. He froze. And in doing so, he became a second shadow to the act that would stain both their names. The moment of the shot, when it came, was silent only in how fast it arrived. No pause, no provocation, no time for Langston to move, because he hadn't. The bullet left Kowalski's weapon and entered a space where no threat had existed. The sound that followed, August's scream, was unmistakable. The raw, keening grief tore through the speakers, undeniable and pure. By mid-morning, the footage had been downloaded, reposted, mirrored across every platform that could hold it. The original site crashed from traffic, but the file lived on, shared like gospel. Social media ignited in waves of fury and disbelief. Hashtags surged. Justice for Langston. She was composed. Unleashed truth. Within hours, they were trending nationally. It wasn't just outrage, it was rupture. Petitions sprang up with a ferocity that caught even seasoned activists off guard. Calls for federal investigation, for the removal of the police chief, for charges against the officers, for a public apology, for the resignation of Councilman Eric Bell. The footage left no room for debate. no angles left to spin, no silence left to hide behind. The department issued a statement calling the leak unauthorized and under investigation. They refused to confirm or deny its accuracy. But the court of public truth had already ruled. The people had seen, and they were not going to unsee. Inside August's home, the atmosphere was no longer that of retreat. It had transformed into a war room, measured but alive with purpose. The footage played across every screen, journalists calling for comment, civil rights organizations offering legal support, prominent figures demanding accountability. Cyrus fielded calls while Daria sat across from August, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the moment she had helped unleash. "They'll come after me for this," Daria said, her voice low, steady, but tinged with the awareness of what she had done. "I violated multiple internal media agreements, burned a few bridges I may never walk again." "You did what was right," August replied, without blinking. "They'll say it was reckless. I say it was overdue." And they did come. Within hours, anonymous threats began pouring into Daria's inbox. Emails laced with coded warnings, thinly veiled messages about careers ending, legal threats drafted on letterheads too polished to be fake. One of her editors called her in a panic. Another pretended to know nothing about her source. But Daria held the line. She didn't retract. She didn't apologize. She doubled down. That afternoon, she released a second report. This time, it wasn't just the footage. It was the emails, internal communications between precinct officials, redacted call logs showing the existence of the preemptive notification program, and most damning of all, a memo from Councilman Bell's office dated 3 weeks before the shooting. It referred to strategic community watch notifications and mentioned flagging individuals in transitional zones for behavioral reporting. The language was vague, coded, but the intent was unmistakable. The preemptive call that described August's exact outfit hadn't been an overreaction. It had been a plan. Bell's office denied the program existed. Then they refused to comment. Then the spokesperson vanished from the press circuit altogether. By evening, even formerly neutral commentators were shifting. News panels debated not whether wrongdoing had occurred, but how deep it ran. The conversation had changed shape. It was no longer about a woman and her dog in a park. It was about power wielded in darkness, and what happens when that darkness is dragged into the light. The council chambers were never built for confrontation. With its velvet-backed chairs, carved wood podiums, and the self-important quiet of a space designed to appear dignified, it had always felt more like a theater than a forum. But on the morning the council convened for the emergency session, the illusion collapsed beneath the weight of what had been exposed. The room was packed beyond capacity, the overflow crowd spilling into the hallway where speakers had been mounted hastily the night before. Protesters lined the steps outside, their signs raised against a slate-gray sky that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered. Inside, the faces of the council members were stiff with rehearsed neutrality. But beneath that veneer, panic lived. The footage had shifted everything. It had stripped away the narrative scaffolding that institutions like theirs depended on. The tidy official statements, the public reassurances, the deflections. Now, the truth played on every screen in the country, and the weight of silence had become impossible to carry. Council President Teresa Blakely, herself a career moderate who had often towed the line between police loyalty and political pragmatism, cleared her throat and began reading the motion for an independent inquiry. The language was still cautious, to determine whether departmental procedures were appropriately followed, rather than the more truthful acknowledgement that trust had been broken. But the meaning was understood by everyone in the room. Kowalski and Riker were suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation. No ceremony, no denial, just a brief notice sent to press. But what followed from the police department was anything but quiet. Chief Harold Denning, in a televised address that afternoon, stood flanked by high-ranking officers and delivered what he likely thought would be a calming statement. His voice was steady, his uniform immaculate, his cadence polished from years of media appearances. But his message was clear. Our officers acted in accordance with the information available to them in a tense, rapidly evolving situation. The department regrets the emotional toll this has taken on the community, but we stand by our protocols and our people. Law enforcement does not bend to political pressure. It answers to principle. His tone didn't land as measured. It landed as defiant. And the public heard it for what it was, a refusal, not just to apologize, but to acknowledge harm. The backlash that followed was immediate, sweeping, and relentless. Protests swelled, not only in August's city, but across the country. What had begun as a local tragedy now pulsed at the heart of a national conversation. Petitions multiplied, calls for Denning's resignation surged, and overnight, the city's handling of the entire case became a litmus test for the nation's conscience. Cable segments that once debated August's actions now dissected the police chief's every word. Federal civil rights attorneys from multiple firms reached out to join August's legal team, their statements crisp and unified. This case was no longer about a single act of violence. It was about systemic behavior, and it would be pursued as such. Cyrus, working almost without sleep, had transformed the dining room into a full-scale war desk. With timelines mapped across cork boards, document clusters digitized and indexed, and whistleblower interviews organized by time and topic, he oversaw the secure distribution of evidence to national media outlets and legal observers. No file was sent without encryption. No thread of misinformation was left unchallenged. What had begun as a son seeking justice had evolved into a coordinated, meticulous campaign to dismantle the shield of plausible deniability the city had always relied upon. Meanwhile, Daria's reporting, once relegated to her modest local platform, now reached millions. Her voice, clear, sober, and unwavering, had found a new home on a national investigative outlet. And she continued her work with the same care that had earned August's trust in the first place. She declined offers to make the case about her. She declined speaking invitations and awards. Her focus remained on the story, and she carried it with the weight it deserved. And then, almost quietly, Eric Bell resigned. There was no press conference, no televised statement, just a single-page letter submitted to the council clerk, and a cryptic message on social media thanking constituents for the honor of public service. The resignation was effective immediately. His office, once a hub of local influence, was cleared out by the end of the day. The whispers that followed suggested internal emails had surfaced linking his office to the preemptive surveillance program. Nothing public. Not yet, but enough to silence him before someone else made the silence permanent. Still, August remained largely removed from the spotlight. She continued her days in relative quiet, meeting with her legal team, reviewing transcripts, preparing testimony, and walking each evening, not with Langston, but alone, along the quieter side streets where no one stared too long. But when the vigil was announced, she agreed to speak. It was held in the park. Thousands came. Candles lined the path where it had happened. At the foot of the tree nearest the playground, children had placed drawings, crayon portraits of Langston, simple notes with hearts, words like protector, hero, and sorry. The air was cool but still. Voices lowered as August stepped to the microphone, the weight of the moment thick but welcomed. She stood without paper, without a speech, just her voice. "I have spent my life in the company of laws," she began. her tone even and solemn, not loud, but firm enough to carry. "I have interpreted them. I have taught them. I have seen them weaponized and ignored, upheld and abandoned. But I have also believed, stubbornly, that justice is not an illusion. It is not a luxury for the powerful or a punishment for the poor. Justice," she said, her eyes scanning the faces before her, "is not a sentiment. It is a contract." The crowd held its breath. "And when that contract is broken, it is not our duty to grieve quietly or to wait patiently for permission to speak. It is our duty to repair it." A single candle flickered near her feet, the flame bending slightly in the wind but holding. She stepped back, and the silence that followed her exit said more than any chant ever could. The courtroom felt like an old wound dressed in marble. Tall, coffered ceilings arched overhead, their ornate trim faded beneath the muted glare of recessed lighting. The walls, painted in shades of gray that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it, were lined with portraits of judges from another era. Names that once echoed through law libraries and dissenting opinions, now little more than oil and frame. The air carried the sterile scent of legal ritual. Worn carpet, polished benches, a hint of ink and stale coffee. This was Federal Court, Eastern District, and though the architecture was designed to impress, the weight of the moment far outstripped the wood and stone that contained it. August sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by two attorneys of her choosing, one a polished constitutional litigator from Chicago, the other a civil rights specialist who had once argued before her when she still wore the robe. Neither spoke as the judge entered. Neither had to. The room had stilled to attention the moment August had stood, slow but unshaking, her cane tapping softly against the floor like a prelude. Judge Meredith Rawlins presided, sharp-witted, short-tempered, and notoriously intolerant of grandstanding. Her gray hair was cut in a crisp bob that matched her clipped cadence and the relentless discipline of her docket. She settled into her chair with the practiced ease of someone who had long ago mastered the performance of neutrality. To the right, at the defense table, sat the city's lead counsel, flanked by a team of government lawyers whose expressions ranged from wary to unreadable. But it was the seat farthest left that drew the most eyes. Brent Kowalski, hair shorter than before, face leaner, posture taut. His suit fit well, but not comfortably. His eyes shifted frequently, not to August, not to the judge, but toward the jury box, where 12 strangers now sat, with their arms folded and brows furrowed, absorbing every word, every breath. Riker sat just behind him, silent and smaller somehow, as if the months between the shooting and the subpoena had taken something out of him that hadn't returned. The trial had moved swiftly. The lawsuit, filed in federal court with sweeping accusations of misconduct, falsified reports, and civil rights violations, had landed like a thunderclap. Within days, the subpoenas followed. Internal department memos, training manuals, dispatch call logs, GPS records, personnel files, and private communications, all pulled into the light with a velocity that rattled the city's legal infrastructure. And the depositions had spoken volumes. A whistleblower from within the department's Internal Affairs Division admitted under oath that at least 7 prior use-of-force incidents involving Kowalski had been flagged and quietly buried. Complaints had been sealed. Witnesses discredited. Disciplinary records erased with the stroke of a file administrator's key. The most damning revelation came from the personnel file itself. A psychological evaluation conducted 3 years prior that had recommended Kowalski be removed from field duty following an altercation during a traffic stop. The report, signed by a department psychologist, had been ignored. That same psychologist had since resigned. Now, the courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the echo of Judge Rawlins's voice. "Call your next witness," she said. Plaintiff calls Officer Sean Riker to the stand. There was a faint stir in the gallery. Daria, seated in the second row with her notebook poised and camera crew waiting just outside, leaned forward. Cyrus, hands clasped tightly on his lap, didn't move. He watched his mother's eyes instead, trying to read her calm the way he once read bedtime stories beside her chair. Riker stepped forward slowly, suit jacket tugging awkwardly at the shoulders of a man used to body armor, not tailoring. He sat, took the oath, and fixed his gaze on a point somewhere just above the jury box. The attorney began softly. "Officer Riker, you were present on the morning of October 2nd, correct?" "Yes." "You arrived at Dunbar Park in response to a 911 call about a dog?" "Yes." "Were you briefed prior to arriving?" "Yes." "Dispatch said a large dog was behaving aggressively near children. And when you arrived, did you observe that behavior?" Riker paused. His jaw worked once. Then, "No, I didn't." August didn't blink. "Did you see the dog lunging, pulling, or threatening the officers?" "No. The dog was alert, standing between the woman and Officer Kowalski, but not aggressive." The room shifted subtly. Shoulders leaned in. Pencils stilled over notepads. "Did you advise Officer Kowalski to use force?" "No." "Did you say anything that morning suggesting restraint?" "Yes. I told him the dog was leashed. I said we should wait." "And what did Officer Kowalski do?" Riker swallowed. He fired his weapon. "Was there an immediate threat that would justify that use of force?" Silence. "No," Riker said finally. "There wasn't." There was a faint collective exhale, as if the room had been holding its breath for the admission. But August remained still, her gaze steady, hands folded neatly on the table before her. She had seen justice reduced to spectacle too many times to confuse performance for resolution. The attorney turned slightly. "Officer Riker, were you aware of a program within the department instructing patrol officers to preemptively monitor certain individuals in transitional zones?" Riker hesitated. "In other words," the attorney continued, "had you been directed to observe or report on people not suspected of crimes, but flagged based on community complaints or internal watch lists?" Riker's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. His voice, when it came, was lower. "Yes, it was unofficial. But we were briefed, told to look out for certain profiles, especially around parks and schools." "Was the plaintiff one of those profiles?" A pause, longer than the others. Then, "Yes, she was on the list." Gasps scattered through the room like sparks. The judge tapped her gavel once, sharply. "Order." But it was too late. The truth was already in the air. "And Officer Kowalski?" the attorney asked. "Was he aware?" Riker nodded once, slowly. "He was." August's eyes closed just long enough to breathe once through her nose. Not victory, not relief, just confirmation. Cold, steady, exact. No further questions. The trial had moved beyond the courtroom. By the third week, it lived across television screens, podcasts, daily headlines, and dinner table conversations in homes far from the city where Langston had fallen. Camera crews lined the courthouse steps from morning until long after sundown, and protesters kept vigil with signs, candles, and chants that no longer needed prompting. August Hill's name, once spoken in chambers with reverence, now echoed through the streets like a promise too long deferred. Inside the courtroom, the mood had changed. The decorum remained. Judge Rawlins still presided with precision, and the attorneys followed protocol with military polish. But the atmosphere felt different, tense, charged, alive with consequence. The facts had all been laid bare. The edited footage, the whistleblowers, the falsified reports, the systemic negligence, the racism, the complicity. Each revelation had struck like a hammer on stone, cracking the facade of official procedure until only truth remained. And now it was August's turn. She rose slowly from the plaintiff's table as the courtroom clerk called for closing statements. The eyes of the nation, quite literally, were on her. News stations streamed the trial live. Courtroom artists leaned over sketch pads. The jury, 12 individuals from 12 walks of life, watched her with full attention, their expressions guarded, but not cold. August did not carry notes. She did not lean on the podium. She walked slowly into the center of the well, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, every inch the judge she once was. Though now, stripped of robes and title, she carried a different kind of authority, one rooted not in institutional power, but in personal truth. She paused, long enough for silence to settle, but not so long as to give it time to wither. "When I was appointed to the bench," she began, her voice low and even, "I believed that the law was not a shield, but a mirror, that it should reflect not just the letter of justice, but its spirit." She turned slowly, letting her gaze pass over the jury. Power is not inherently corrupt, but power that answers to no one, that silences the vulnerable, and protects its own through policy and delay, is not power. It is cowardice dressed in uniform. A low ripple of murmurs stirred before being hushed by the bailiff's warning glance. "I did not ask to be targeted. I did not ask to bury a dog who never bit, never charged, never disobeyed. I did not ask to be reduced to a profile in a database designed to flag certain faces for heightened caution. But I will not pretend it was an accident." She took a breath, steady and full. This was not about a bark. It was not about a leash. It was about presumption. That I would be quiet. That I would be afraid. That I would not matter. That I was just one more body to be moved. One more file to be closed. August turned to the bench. And it was about a system that taught those officers, through silence, through lack of discipline, through buried complaints, that escalation is easier than understanding. That reaction is safer than restraint. That fear, when dressed in the right uniform, will always be justified. Her voice did not rise, but it pressed. The law is a promise. It's not perfect. It never has been. But it is ours to keep or ours to lose. And if you let this moment pass without consequence, you are teaching every future officer, every future victim, and every future judge that some lives matter less than others. She nodded once, deeply, to the jury. "And that," she said, "would be a betrayal of us all." As she returned to her seat, the hush that followed wasn't silent. It was reverent. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When the verdict was read, the courtroom remained frozen in its solemnity, despite the noise threatening to erupt just outside the walls. Kowalski, who had not once made eye contact with August throughout the proceedings, stood as the jury foreperson, announced that he would face criminal charges for unlawful use of force and falsifying official statements. His attorney attempted to object to the language, but was cut short by Judge Rawlins with a sharp look that needed no words. Riker was barred from future law enforcement employment. His cooperation spared him from prosecution, but not from consequence. And Chief Harold Denning, whose name had appeared in far too many internal communications to ignore, was removed under the order of federal oversight. The Justice Department announced an open review of his leadership and policies dating back 7 years. His resignation followed quietly before the week's end. The city offered a settlement, $12 million, with a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a written apology signed by the mayor, the new interim police chief, and the head of the council. August declined the money. She accepted the apology, not for herself, but for what it represented, for every name that never received one, for every parent, spouse, or sibling who buried someone they loved without justice. Instead, she established the Langston Fund. Its mission was simple and unflinching: to provide legal aid for families affected by police violence, to fund data transparency work on civil rights cases, and to offer scholarships for students pursuing careers in justice reform. Within a week of its launch, the fund had raised nearly double the settlement amount from donors across the country. Outside the courthouse, a bronze plaque had been installed along the park's eastern path, Langston's Path. It bore no dramatic inscription, just his name, the date, and beneath it, he stood without aggression, and still they feared him. August visited only once in those early days. She stood in silence, hands tucked into her coat pockets, the wind tugging softly at the edges of her scarf. Around her, the city moved as it always had, fast, distracted, unaware. But this time, it moved around a scar that had not been allowed to close quietly. It had been forced open, exposed, and stitched together in full view. There would be more trials, more names, more days where justice had to be demanded. But this one had been won, and that mattered. It was nearly midnight when the message arrived. Daria had been expecting something, though she hadn't known what exactly. Only that the files she'd requested from a semi-retired forensic auditor in Milwaukee had taken longer than usual to come through. She had assumed it was just bureaucracy dragging its feet, maybe a delay in decryption or a reluctance to poke too hard into someone else's city politics. But when the email landed in her inbox, no subject line, just an attached document and a single line of text that read, "You were right to ask about Tillman." She felt something cold settle under her skin. She opened it without breathing. The document was a donor ledger, mundane on its surface, a spreadsheet cataloging financial contributions to the city's police union PAC over the past 18 months. But 5 lines in, the name snapped her fully awake. David Tillman. Occupation, private equity. Affiliation, Central Security Solutions. Total donations, $96,000. Breakdown, 3 events. 2 hosted at private residence. She double-checked the address listed on the filing. It matched the one Maureen Tillman had provided in her civil deposition. For a long moment, Daria just stared at the screen, not moving. Then she began typing. "Charlie." When August opened her door the next morning, Daria was already on the porch, holding a sealed manila folder as if it weighed more than it should. Her coat was damp from the fog, her face drawn but resolved. "They set you up," she said, before August could offer a greeting. August stepped aside wordlessly and gestured her in. At the dining table, Daria laid out the folder, flipping open pages with the same deliberate care a surgeon might use with a scalpel. She explained what she'd found: the financial trail linking Maureen Tillman's husband to the police union, the fundraising events, the strategy memos leaked by an anonymous staffer with access to campaign coordination files. But it wasn't just the money. The money was ugly, but it wasn't enough to build the case. Then came the emails. Encrypted messages between a union communications director and an aide in Councilman Bell's office. Subject: Community Optics and Patrol Visibility. One message in particular stood out. It was sent 4 days before the shooting. The timestamp was 7:08 p.m. "The Tillman contact is willing to play her part if we need a civilian call. Says the shepherd in the park, makes people uncomfortable. Her husband wants visibility on this, and Bell doesn't want another summer headline." August read the line twice. Then she pushed the folder back and sat perfectly still, her fingers folding slowly on the tabletop. It was the same posture she had taken during oral arguments, back when she was on the bench, right before she dismantled someone's case, word by word. Her voice was low when she finally spoke. "They didn't just lie." Daria said nothing. "They staged it. They rehearsed fear. And they chose me because I was walking quietly and fit the description of someone who wouldn't fight back. She said it without rage. It was something heavier. Not even sorrow. Calculation. They thought they'd be dealing with a complaint, August murmured, almost to herself. Not a witness. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out into the soft gray morning. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. She didn't blink. The donation amounts were too precise, she said. That wasn't charity. That was purchase. They were buying influence, Daria confirmed. And cover. Maureen's panic? The call? That wasn't fear. That was performance. August pressed her hand to the glass, the cool pain grounding her in the moment. Her voice, when she spoke again, had lost none of its clarity. I want every piece of it. Every email, every donor, every connection between that office and the department. I want this not buried in a court record. I want it read. Daria nodded. We publish it your way. On your terms. August didn't turn from the window. No more waiting. The report went live the next morning, released directly from August's own foundation website. No intermediaries, no political handlers, no journalists recutting quotes to fit a narrative. It was a comprehensive, meticulously footnoted, openly attributed indictment. A digital dossier laid bare. It detailed the strategic use of civilian complaints as pretexts for police escalation in targeted districts. It traced campaign donations that bypassed traditional reporting channels by being filtered through family foundations. It cited a pattern of coordination between local government staffers and the police union's internal communications team to manufacture justification for patrol increases and community interventions under the guise of safety optics. It named names. And most damning of all, it included Maureen Tillman's full deposition transcript, juxtaposed against the leaked email that proved her role wasn't incidental, but calculated. The impact was immediate. The city's news cycle, already saturated with post-trial commentary, erupted again. Maureen Tillman's attorney issued a hasty denial that did more damage than good, while her husband's company pulled its website offline within hours. Councilman Bell's former aide was subpoenaed within 48 hours of the release. The police union issued a statement calling the report an act of personal vengeance. But even they couldn't deny what was printed in black and white. What had happened to August Hill hadn't been accidental. It had been designed. Later that week, standing before a quiet press gathering, August addressed the city once more. Not as plaintiff, not as retired justice, but as citizen. They assumed the power they borrowed would protect them, that their masks of bureaucracy, of civility, would be enough to shield intent. But power does not hide who we are. It reveals it. She paused. And they showed us everything. The courtroom was nearly full by the time the final session was called to order. After everything, the hearings, the trial, the damning report, there was only one matter left unresolved: the criminal charges against Brent Kowalski. The prosecution had called its final witness. The evidence had been presented. The jury had deliberated. Now came the moment the nation had waited for. Eyes wide, silence thick, breath held just beyond the frame of every broadcast screen. The judge gave no preamble. She nodded once, and the bailiff opened the door. Kowalski was led to the witness stand not by obligation, but by request. His own legal team had advised against it. But after the report surfaced, after the texts and emails and internal memos drew clear the shape of something colder than negligence, he had asked to speak. Some speculated it was desperation. Others said it was a final attempt to twist the narrative. But no one, not even the defense, could have predicted what was coming. August stood once more. As she approached the stand, she didn't seem vengeful or victorious, just steady, grounded by the weight of purpose, not pride. She carried no notes. She had no need. "Mr. Kowalski," she began, her tone level, "you were made aware that your personnel file contained prior complaints, correct?" "Yes." "And that your use of force record had been flagged 3 times by internal supervisors?" He nodded. "And yet, you remained on active patrol?" "I did." She let that hang for just a moment. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. "When you arrived at Dunbar Park that morning, what did you see?" Kowalski hesitated. His voice, when it came, was strained. "I saw a woman with a large dog. Near children. Did you recognize me?" "No." "So you did not know who I was?" "No." "Did I make any aggressive movement toward you?" "No." "Did the dog?" He swallowed hard. "No." The room was still. August's voice was quiet now, nearly a whisper. "Then why did you draw your weapon?" Kowalski's hands gripped the edge of the witness box. His knuckles whitened. His eyes flicked down to the floor, then back up, toward the judge, toward the jury, and finally, toward her. "I saw her," he said slowly, voice cracking on the last word, "and thought, she was just another one." It hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, silence, audible shock. Even the court reporter's fingers stuttered for a beat before continuing. August didn't move. She didn't blink. She stepped forward, one hand resting on the railing, eyes locked on his. "I was," she said, her voice cutting through the room like glass. "Just another one. And that's the tragedy." Nothing more needed saying. She turned and walked away, cane tapping softly as she made her way back to her seat. Judge Rawlins glanced toward the jury box, her face unreadable but not unmoved. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A 4-person stood. "We have, Your Honor." The room held its breath. "On the count of felony reckless endangerment resulting in death of an animal and deprivation of civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty." The words cracked through the courtroom like the final strike of a gavel. Not loud, but irreversible. Applause rose, not from frenzy, but from something deeper. A room exhaling a weight it had been holding too long. A chorus, not of celebration, but of release. Judge Rawlins allowed it. Just this once. In the days that followed, the city bent to the storm. Maureen Tillman resigned from her neighborhood council position after it was revealed that she and her husband had participated in more than just passive complicity. A deeper review of city records showed that they had, in fact, hosted planning sessions, informal strategy evenings attended by political donors and off-duty officers where complaints were shared, exaggerated, and mapped to preemptive patrol initiatives. Her panic, it turned out, had been practiced like a script. Her statement to the press was short and unemotional. "I was wrong. I let fear become weaponized." No further appearances followed. Councilman Eric Bell, already disgraced, was officially indicted for conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. His former aide flipped. More names were expected. Chief Denning was never heard from publicly again. And August? She never returned to the courtroom. Her part was done. Instead, she returned to her work, quietly, methodically, with the same precision she had once brought to oral arguments and judicial opinions. The Langston Fund expanded rapidly, receiving nationwide support and forming legal partnerships in cities across the country. It began training community attorneys, publishing open-access research, and launching mentorships for law students from historically underrepresented communities. August declined all interview requests. She didn't want to become a symbol. She only wanted the work to outlive the story. One evening, a local school named their new reading garden after Langston. When August attended the ribbon cutting, she stood by the mural, a painting of the German shepherd sitting calmly beside a park bench, eyes gentle, body at rest. The children didn't ask for speeches. They handed her a letter they had written together. It read, "He protected her. And now, she protects all of us." August closed her eyes and let the moment settle. Not as closure, but as continuation. Justice, she knew, was never a destination. It was a contract, and hers had just begun. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.